The cargo manifest list is obviously with the investigation team. We carry some lithium-ion small batteries. They are not big batteries, but they are basically approved under the ICAO how we basically under dangerous good. Not dangerous good to say, but in terms of they're not declared as dangerous good under ICAO.
It began with a mysterious shipment. According to French judicial documents released in 2019, a small crate weighing about 200 pounds was added to Malaysia Airlines flight MH370's cargo list only after the plane had already taken off. At the same time, the airline's official report confirmed something even more alarming. Nearly 440 pounds of lithium-ion batteries were also on board, the kind of material that can ignite if stored improperly. When MH370 vanished from radar, both shipments were sealed inside classified investigation files. No public record ever showed how they were screened or why their documentation changed. For 7 long hours after the radar went silent, ghostly satellite pings kept echoing across the Indian Ocean, proof that something on board was still alive or pretending to be. It wasn't just a missing airplane anymore. It was a riddle sealed in steel and sky, one that refuses to fade even after a decade. Could the real secret of MH370 lie not above the clouds, but inside those 2 mysterious crates that were never meant to be found? In the weeks after flight MH370 vanished, grief turned into suspicion. Families demanded to see every detail of the cargo manifest, hoping it might explain what had really been loaded onto the plane that night. But Malaysia's government refused to release the full documentation, citing national security. To this day, portions of that manifest remain sealed, and what little we know only deepens the mystery. Investigators later confirmed that part of the cargo record had been altered after takeoff. According to official data reviewed by the New Straits Times, one shipment was logged retroactively. Added to the system minutes after MH370 was already airborne. That anomaly should have triggered an audit. Instead, the file was quietly edited and locked. The shipment itself came from a restricted section of the Kuala Lumpur International Airport Cargo Complex near the Royal Malaysian Air Force Base in Subang. Documents described it only as special electronic equipment, with no details about the manufacturer, owner, or intended recipient in Beijing. The lack of transparency was baffling, especially for a flight that had become the focus of the largest search operation in aviation history. At the same time, aviation safety experts raised alarm over the other major item on board: 440 pounds of lithium-ion batteries. These are the same type of cells known to overheat and ignite under certain conditions. A similar cargo had caused a UPS Boeing 747 to catch fire and crash in Dubai in 2010. The parallels were chilling, yet despite repeated questions, Malaysian officials downplayed the risk, saying the batteries had been properly packed and declared safe. But independent analysts weren't convinced. Some suggested that a slow, smoldering fire could have filled the cabin with toxic fumes, knocking out communications and forcing the pilots to make a desperate turnback. Others believed the fire might have damaged critical systems, causing the transponder failure that made MH370 vanish from radar at 1:21 a.m. Still, none of these theories explain why the cargo records were modified. If the batteries were standard and safe, why classify the documents? Why block international investigators from reviewing security footage of the loading area? As the search dragged on, each unanswered question became a spark for new speculation. Was the shipment part of a covert transfer linked to military technology? Was it sensitive research material that authorities didn't want exposed? Or was it simply a bureaucratic error that spiraled into conspiracy after years of silence? What's undeniable is this: the truth about what MH370 carried that night remains buried under layers of secrecy. Even after a decade, journalists and families still face redacted pages, missing logs, and denials. In a world where transparency should bring closure, the Malaysian cargo manifest stands as a locked door, one that guards the first real clue to the world's most haunting aviation mystery. If it was just ordinary cargo, just harmless batteries, then why has that file stayed sealed for 10 long years? In 2019, 5 years after MH370 vanished without a trace, a new document surfaced in France that reignited the investigation. During a judicial inquiry led by relatives of the French passengers, including Ghislain Watralos, the father of 3 victims, a confidential report revealed something shocking. It stated that a single 90-kilogram, around 200-pound crate had been added to the cargo manifest after flight MH370 had already taken off from Kuala Lumpur. The revelation came from French magistrates overseeing an independent probe into the crash, as France had legal jurisdiction due to several of its citizens being on board. The document later confirmed that this additional shipment was logged retroactively into the system. It appeared as if the crate had materialized after departure, an impossibility under standard aviation protocol. Yet there it was, listed on the final manifest without any details about its sender, contents, or handling procedures. For investigators, this discovery was more than a clerical error. It suggested a potential manipulation of official records. No surveillance footage was ever released from the cargo terminal that night, and customs authorities in Malaysia declined to explain how an unverified load was cleared for international flight. Even more puzzling, the manifest entry had no accompanying airway bill number, the document required for any shipment to be tracked across borders. Aviation experts began to wonder if the missing data pointed to something sensitive, perhaps a government-related delivery or a military contract hidden under a civilian flight. The theory gained traction because MH370's cargo loading area was managed in part by Mass Cargo, a company with both commercial and defense clients. If the crate contained restricted components, its omission from public records would make sense, but it would also mean that passengers and crew were unknowingly flying with materials never meant to be transported on a civilian route. Others proposed a more technical scenario. If the crate held equipment with magnetic or chemical properties, even minor instability could have triggered interference or overheating in the lower deck. Combined with the known presence of lithium-ion batteries, such materials could have created the perfect storm, a slow, undetected event that spread through the avionics bay or compromised power systems. Yet nothing about the 90-kilogram shipment has ever been publicly clarified. French investigators requested further documentation from Malaysia, but received none. The Malaysian government insisted that all cargo was screened and safe, a claim that satisfied no one. To this day, that missing crate sits at the center of one of aviation's most perplexing puzzles. Was it a harmless shipment mislabeled in haste, or a deliberately concealed package tied to something far larger? 2 shipments, one declared, one hidden. Both left Kuala Lumpur aboard a plane that would never be seen again. Could they together have written the tragic final chapter of flight MH370? It was just after midnight on March 8, 2014, when Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 lifted off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport. The Boeing 777 carried 239 souls on board, bound for Beijing on what should have been a routine overnight flight. The weather was calm, the crew experienced, and nothing about that night seemed unusual. At 1:19 a.m., Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah's voice came calmly over the radio. "Good night, Malaysian 370. It would be the last confirmed words anyone ever heard from the flight.
Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night. Good night, Malaysian 370.
2 minutes later, the plane vanished from civilian radar screens. Air traffic controllers in Kuala Lumpur tried to make contact, but every attempt failed. MH370 simply disappeared into the night sky, leaving behind only silence. What most people didn't know at the time was that the disappearance wasn't instant. It was calculated. Military radar later showed that the aircraft had made a sharp turn back across the Malaysian peninsula, heading west toward the Strait of Malacca. It climbed, then descended, flying erratically but deliberately, as if under the command of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. For the next hour, MH370 flew completely off the grid. Its transponder, the electronic heartbeat that identifies a plane to air traffic control, had been manually switched off. That act alone transformed one of the world's safest passenger jets into a ghost. No signal, no trace, no explanation. Malaysian military radar continued to track the unidentified object as it crossed the peninsula and passed close to Penang Island, the hometown of Captain Zahari. The aircraft then turned northwest, following a path that defied its original flight plan entirely. Experts believe the person in control was flying along the borders of radar coverage, slipping through gaps between Malaysian, Thai, and Indonesian monitoring zones. It was a maneuver that required skill, precision, and intimate knowledge of the region's defense systems. At 2:22 a.m., the last military radar contact was recorded near the edge of Malaysia's airspace. After that, MH370 entered a silent world, one without communication, navigation, or witnesses. Hours later, a faint series of automated satellite pings would still be detected, tracing a lonely arc deep into the southern Indian Ocean. But in that moment, on the night of its disappearance, no one yet knew what those signals meant. What happened in those crucial minutes after the final radio call remains one of the greatest enigmas in aviation. Was it a deliberate act by someone in the cockpit, or the result of a cascading system failure? Did a hijacking unfold quietly at 35,000 feet, masked by the sudden loss of communication? Whoever made the decision to shut down MH370's transponder and communication systems ensured that the aircraft would become invisible. It was a vanishing act performed with chilling precision. The question that still echoes a decade later is simple yet haunting. Who gave the order to silence an entire plane? And why would anyone do that? Even after flight MH370 slipped from radar, the silence wasn't complete. Hidden high above Earth, satellites kept listening. Among them was Inmarsat 3F1, a British communication satellite that quietly recorded something strange. 7 hours of faint automated handshakes from the missing Boeing 777. These weren't distress signals or radio calls. They were pings, electronic acknowledgments that the aircraft's systems were still awake, still reaching out to the sky long after it had disappeared. Between 2:25 a.m. and 8:19 a.m., Inmarsat detected a total of 8 connections. Each one was separated by roughly an hour, as if the plane's satellite terminal was checking in. The final ping came from a point deep over the Indian Ocean, along what became known as Arc 7, an invisible line marking where MH370's final signal originated. That data would become the backbone of the entire investigation. When British engineers at Inmarsat analyzed the Doppler shifts of those pings, they discovered something extraordinary. The frequency patterns didn't match a plane sitting idle or spiraling downward. They showed a consistent motion southward, a steady trajectory that could only be produced by controlled flight. To many experts, it meant the aircraft was still powered, still operating under human command. This revelation shattered the idea that MH370 had simply suffered a catastrophic failure. If the plane had exploded or crashed soon after losing radar contact, the satellite system would have gone dark immediately. Instead, it continued to communicate for nearly 7 hours, indicating that onboard systems, including the auxiliary power unit, remained functional. Even more unsettling, someone had to be managing fuel use, adjusting altitude, and maintaining the aircraft's path. The final burst, recorded at 8:19 a.m., marked the end of the digital trail. The signal's frequency shift indicated a sudden drop in altitude, possibly the plane's final descent. But there were no radio calls, no distress beacons, and no debris field for years. Only those ghostly pings whispering from the edge of the world offered proof that MH370 had remained alive in the air long after everyone assumed it was gone. For investigators, those 7 hours became the most haunting timeline in modern aviation. The data suggested a deliberate act, not a drifting wreck. The route followed a narrow southern corridor, consistent with a programmed flight path toward one of the most remote areas on Earth, an empty stretch of ocean with no radar coverage, no islands, and no chance of rescue. To this day, the Inmarsat data remains the only evidence showing what happened after 2:22 a.m. It is both a map and a message from a plane that refused to die quietly. The system wasn't designed to track aircraft. It was meant for routine data exchange, yet it became the only witness left when every other system went dark. If everyone on board was gone, unconscious, or worse, then who or what kept that plane flying for 7 more hours across an ocean that never gave it back? When investigators searched the home of Captain Zaharie Ahmad Shah, they weren't expecting to find a ghost of the missing plane sitting quietly inside his computer. But buried within a hard drive, they uncovered a set of flight simulator files that matched almost perfectly the real flight path MH370 would later take into the southern Indian Ocean. The coordinates, discovered by the FBI in 2014 and confirmed in 2016 by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, traced a simulated journey ending in a remote ocean corridor eerily similar to the one mapped by Inmarsat's satellite pings. It was a chilling discovery. Zaharie's personal simulator showed a planned one-way route south into nowhere, a scenario that mirrored the aircraft's final hours. To some investigators, it was the smoking gun, proof that the captain had premeditated the flight's disappearance. The theory gained momentum after interviews revealed Zaharie as a quiet, highly intelligent man, meticulous in his habits but increasingly isolated in his personal life. Friends described him as reserved and sometimes distant, a man who spent long hours alone tinkering with flight models. Psychological experts who reviewed the data began to suspect a form of controlled self-destruction, a calculated suicide carried out through aviation precision. The simulator data, combined with his expertise, seemed to support the idea that he had rehearsed a deliberate mission south, away from any chance of interception or rescue. But even this explanation left major questions unanswered. The satellite data suggested that MH370's flight after losing radar wasn't erratic. It was unnervingly stable. The plane maintained altitude, adjusted speed, and conserved fuel almost perfectly. It showed the kind of precision associated with autopilot systems rather than emotional chaos. If Zaharie's intent had been a dramatic final act, why choose a path that prolonged flight for 7 hours instead of ending it swiftly? Furthermore, analysis of the final Inmarsat pings indicated technical adjustments that would have required complex system management. These weren't the actions of a man in psychological freefall. They resembled the movements of an operator following a carefully managed flight plan. Even more curious, no distress call or farewell message was ever sent, something almost unheard of in pilot suicide cases. Some analysts suggested an alternative, that Zaharie might not have been in full control. There were theories about remote takeover or external interference, though no official evidence has ever proven such claims. Still, the eerie precision of the flight's final path kept that possibility alive. Was someone else guiding the plane from afar, or was Zaharie himself following instructions, either willingly or under duress? Investigators closed the file on his home simulator as inconclusive, leaving it as one of the most haunting pieces of the MH370 puzzle. It was a cockpit that existed only in code, yet it mirrored the real one too closely to ignore. So the question remains, on that final night, was Captain Zaharie Ahmad Shah truly at the controls of flight MH370, or was he being controlled by something or someone far beyond the cockpit? In the endless blue expanse of the southern Indian Ocean, there is a place where even sound seems to die. It's called Broken Ridge, a vast underwater plateau cut by deep trenches, some plunging nearly 4 miles beneath the surface. For years, it has been the graveyard of hope for those searching for flight MH370. Among the experts drawn to its mystery was Dr. Vincent Line, a marine physicist who believed the official search zones were all wrong. Using his own current flow models and satellite drift data, Line predicted that the wreckage of MH370 would be found at the far edge of Broken Ridge, where powerful underwater streams could have carried the debris and buried it under layers of sediment. His analysis was compelling. Unlike earlier search grids that focused too far north, Line's models aligned with how ocean currents actually behaved during March 2014. In 2018, an independent sonar survey was conducted in the area by Ocean Infinity, a private company equipped with autonomous underwater vehicles capable of scanning miles of ocean floor. When the data came back, it showed something extraordinary: several large metallic anomalies resting deep within the sediment, in a region where no shipwrecks were known to exist. To the untrained eye, these could have been rock formations, but the sonar images displayed smooth, structured shapes, edges too regular, too precise to be natural. Line and his team proposed that at least one of the objects matched the general dimensions of a Boeing 777 fuselage. Yet despite this discovery, no government agency ever confirmed or denied the findings. The data, submitted to both the Australian Transport Safety Bureau and Malaysian authorities, vanished into bureaucratic silence. The official explanation was cautious. Authorities claimed that no definitive aircraft debris had been identified, but refused to release the full sonar maps. To Line, it was a red flag. He suspected that what was found might not have been just airplane debris, but something else entirely, something that couldn't easily be explained to the public. The region itself was geologically unstable, dotted with magnetic anomalies and mineral-rich ridges. If other metallic structures existed down there, they might belong to more than one source. By late 2018, Line's model gained new attention after ocean drift simulations showed that several pieces of confirmed MH370 debris recovered in Africa could have originated from Broken Ridge. Still, no follow-up expedition was ever funded. Official statements from Malaysia and Australia simply moved on, declaring the search suspended indefinitely. For the families, Broken Ridge became both a destination and a warning, a place that held answers no one seemed willing to retrieve. The ocean there is so deep and unpredictable that even advanced sonar loses clarity. It is a realm where machines struggle, signals distort, and truth itself feels buried. So when Dr. Line looked at the sonar echoes of those hidden metallic shapes, one question refused to fade. Maybe they didn't stop searching because they found nothing. Maybe they stopped because they found something that wasn't a plane. Could it be that what lies beside MH370 on the ocean floor is a secret the world isn't ready to face? By 2018, when the final report on flight MH370 was released, the world expected answers. Instead, it received silence. Pages of radar data were blacked out, timestamps were missing, and sections describing the final satellite signals were redacted without reason. The report ended with a single vague line: the team is unable to determine the real cause of disappearance. Behind those words, cracks began to show. Several international experts quietly resigned, citing political pressure. They claimed their access to radar logs and cargo details was suddenly restricted. Neighboring countries like Thailand, Indonesia, and India refused to share their military radar data from that night, citing national security. Even within Malaysia's investigation team, requests to review cargo screening footage were reportedly denied. Journalists chasing the story faced similar dead ends. Communication transcripts were withheld, satellite companies refused to release telemetry data, and those who once spoke openly about the case stopped granting interviews. The more questions raised, the tighter the silence grew. Members of the search operation later confirmed what many had suspected. In interviews with The Guardian and ABC Australia, they said they were told not to ask about the cargo manifest. One source described being redirected whenever questions arose about the shipments loaded before takeoff. Another said parts of the satellite data were labeled restricted, accessible only to high-level government offices. The secrecy surrounding MH370 has long fueled speculation that something more than an accident occurred. Some suspect the plane carried sensitive materials or classified technology, while others believe certain nations coordinated to suppress key evidence. Whatever the truth, the pattern of silence is undeniable. Even after a decade, files related to the investigation remain sealed by Malaysia, China, and Australia. For families still waiting for closure, that silence feels deliberate. Why would a civilian air disaster be treated as a matter of state security? Flight MH370's story is no longer just about a plane lost at sea. It is about the people who may know what happened and why they've chosen not to speak. What could possibly make entire governments and militaries agree to bury the truth about the most mysterious disappearance in aviation history? More than a decade later, Flight MH370 is no longer seen as a simple accident. It has become a riddle born from the crossroads of humanity, technology, and power. From the undeclared cargo to the deliberate flight path, from the ghostly pings that echoed for 7 hours to the sealed reports that followed, every fragment seems to point toward a single unsettling truth. What if MH370 didn't just vanish, but was made to disappear? The ocean may have swallowed the wreckage, but it has not erased the questions. Somewhere between the depths of Broken Ridge and the locked files of governments lies the answer the world still cannot reach. Do you believe it was an accident, a cover-up, or a mission that was never meant to be revealed? Share your thoughts below and subscribe to MindGap, because sometimes what's buried deepest isn't in the ocean at all, but in the files no one dares to open.